Second force. The idea of second force is presented in one interpretation as triads, i.e., if we could raise our level of consciousness in all three forces, then we would realize that expecting things to go right for us equals first force. They don't, of course, and we resist this. Finding circumstances unacceptable equals second force. We could A. see what life is really like, or B. use events as a field for work, then make life our teacher, which equals third force. Perhaps again, the idea of a person as one wants them to be equals first force. Their actions and our dislike of them equals second force. We could allow them to be themselves and see the relationship from a work point of view, which equals third force. This kind of second force takes many forms such as self-pity, dislike, irritation and so on, all arising from the same negative attitude. These observations are examples of changing second force through the force of ideas in this work, by increasing consciousness. The third force of work is different from life, and alters life triads. Bringing the work into situational awareness changes both first and second force, namely we realize through observation that we expect life to go right for us. Observing this as a mechanical habit, we can then see what life is really like. Here the work is acting upon us. Otherwise we'd probably be unhappy, simply because things go as they do, then have nothing added from a work perspective in our way of taking things. We react mechanically, having no concept that we might react differently, failing to grasp what work is about, namely, changing ourselves. Taking then a second force in oneself. It is different, of course, from second force in external life. For a person in prison who only wants to escape, the actual bars, locks, guards and warden represent second force, what opposes their wish. However, if they could escape, but are afraid to run the risk, then second force is also connected with this fear, and so lies within them and not externally. Second force depends upon first force. People want to be happy because we have much in us that makes us miserable. Second force lies therefore within. However, we may remain ignorant of this all our lives, attributing everything to chance and circumstance. One then sees nothing to work upon. This is a naive and a very ordinary state, but unfortunately rather common. The nature of second force depends upon first force. Speaking mainly of these two forces then, why does second force depend upon first force? People think second force is a definite unchanging thing, like a piece of rock. On the contrary, however, second force is changing all the time, passing into different things, and yet is always being second force. So what does this mean? By definition, everything can conduct first, second or third force. When a thing is conducting second force, it is called an oxygen. When it is conducting first force, it is called a carbon. When someone greedily eyes something, it is conducting first force for them. For another person who sees this as an impediment and wants nothing to do with the thing, it is conducting second force. The three forces of the triad are playing through everything always, changing places, altering the value of things. Now, in daily life, and on a larger scale at different stages of our lives. Imagine the three forces as beams of red, yellow and blue light. Then say whatever the red beam falls upon is first force. What the yellow light falls on is second force, and so on. However, the beams can shift and do so continually, so what is attractive becomes the reverse and vice versa. It is not the thing or the event, but the force it conducts for us at that moment which matters. Love makes us see a thing in one way, hate makes us see the same thing in another way. It's all the same thing, however, conducting different forces at different times. This is confusing, and a great nuisance as long as we live solely under the law of the pendulum. After a time, however, we can shift ourselves in consciousness more toward the center, by not identifying with extremes so much. This means becoming conscious in one force, and is the task of the spiritual warrior. We really do not know what we want, as we are not conscious in first force just yet, however it is acting inside, and creating its own second force all of the time, although we fail to see what is doing this. As noted, the nature of second force depends upon first force, so if we take what we want, desire, wish for, expect or hope for as first force, then whatever the nature of our wish, it will arouse a specific and definite second force that opposes this wish. Sometimes the second force appears at once, almost immediately, and sometimes it appears after an interval. It necessarily appears, but is not obliged to do so in the form that we might anticipate, hence we may make no connection at all. In fact, second force most often appears without our understanding why it arises. Self-knowledge, though, can make us see things more clearly. Since every first force arouses its relative second force, we cannot study second force in ourselves unless we are more conscious of first force, which may be acting all the time without our being aware of it. Always expecting things to be different is wishful thinking. It's a kind of continual vague first force, and so will summon a continual vague kind of second force, which will appear as something lying in external circumstances. However, this second force lies not in external circumstances, but in ourselves. We often find this difficult to believe, but when we lack self-knowledge, then everything appears to be the fault of something outside of us. Our senses are turned outward, so we do not observe ourselves. These are fundamental ideas, and we constantly repeat these with people, family, and friends. We ask ourselves and others, why outside things seem to prevent us from getting what we want. What is meant here is that it is difficult to see that second force in oneself prevents us from getting what we desire. When external subjective matters go well, we often still have a feeling of dissatisfaction, which shows that second force lies really in oneself, which is an astute observation. Where is second force in myself? I do not see that I am stupid, ignorant, lazy, selfish, narrow, or mean, so I fail to see my shallowness. That, for example, I am slanderous, lying, incapable and difficult. All this is second force within me. Ouspensky once noted, when speaking about second force in ourselves, that ignorance is a very common form of it. People prefer to pretend that they know things. They answer as if they know things, when they really do not know, which increases ignorance in them. Really, to think one is ignorant with regard to something is quite different from pretending to know it, then becoming confused when asked or challenged about it. If we become conscious of our ignorance regarding something, it may create the desire to know more, which means the situation is then quite different. Where there was formerly pretense and unawakened ignorance, there is now a self-acknowledged learning gap, and a desire to remedy that state. All forms of pretending and falsehood constitute a first force, which inevitably gives rise to certain forms of second force. The work says that one of the greatest evils is to pretend, which is the sin against the Holy Spirit, or essence within us. A change in consciousness arises through self-observation, and the feeling of oneself changes. With this, there is less and less pretending, more and more realization of what exists in oneself, and what is the state of our being. All this changes first and second force within us. However, that change is effected through the orientation of this work. What is second force in us with regard to the desire to self-remember and to awaken? The work tells us what the forces are that resist awakening within, which is the second rebirth, or baptism of the Holy Spirit. The whole work can be understood in this light. If I am very identified with some life ambition, then this will be second force in me with regard to the work, and it will put me to sleep. Suppose we could do everything from a work perspective. Nothing would change in what we were doing perhaps, however, an inner relationship would change. In this regard, it is interesting to study the nature of second force in ourselves, in relation to the three lines of this work. We can often see through self-observation that one I in ourselves opposes another I, or one group of I's opposes another group of I's. Whichever opposing force gains the upper hand becomes first force. Some I's may, for example, be talking wrongly, and other I's may see that this wrong talking could stop, if we could only remember ourselves. Which group of I's is going to become first force? We should be very careful when getting up in the morning to work on ourselves. In fact, before getting up, as all sorts of unpleasant eyes may start talking about their troubles, adopting a certain attitude toward the day. If we wish to listen to them, we will be absorbing negative impressions, and so starting the day well poisoned. Remember that we need not take things as we do, and that this applies to our inner lives as well as to our behavior in outer, material life as well. If we let ourselves take in a number of negative impressions from our own thoughts and memories, then we will increase second force with regard to any first force of trying to awaken, to live the life of this work at least to some extent during our day. There are two lives that we can lead from that first waking moment. After a time, it is possible to begin to know what the other life means that we can experience in ourselves, that which the work can form in us. We can distinguish it from the life of any ordinary affairs of the day, ultimately living in both, where gradually they cease to lie in opposition to one another. To see second force in ourselves, we must become conscious in first force. Many years ago, someone recounted a recurring dream. "I dream," this person said, "that I am sitting on a high throne. It seems as if an immense concourse of people surrounds me, with heads bent low. Suddenly the throne gives way, and I feel I am falling and awaken in fear." Here we can see both first and second force at work in the individual. The person had an intractable pride, but was oblivious to it. This would obviously be a very bad arrangement of forces in oneself, and one that is likely to make life as difficult and disastrous as possible. Since the three forces exist in us, as too in the entire universe, it is not surprising to find that checks and balances exist, that, for example, prevent us from realizing the idea contained in such a dream. In this regard, perhaps we can recall a similar type of dream spoken of in the Old Testament, where a person of overwhelming ambition and vanity is described there too. This is the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which he relates to the prophet Daniel. The king says, "I saw, and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the branches thereof, and all flesh was fed of it." The king goes on to relate how in his dream a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven, then ordered the tree to be cut down, leaving only the stump of the roots in the grass, saying, "Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth." This was to be done so that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. Daniel interpreted the dream as a sign that as a result of the king's overwhelming ambition, which was reaching up to the heavens, and so to the ends of the earth, that he was to be cast down, until he recognized that all power on earth was God's to give to whom he desired. With a wrong first force, our whole inner state of being may be rendered ineffective, even dangerous, to the extent that one has a very bad relationship to oneself. So it is to this first force that one has to look and observe, then gradually become conscious of its role within our inner lives, asking what do we then want? Consider in this regard the ideas contained in the Sermon on the Mount, and the ideas revealed in the Lord's Prayer.